Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast. I'm going to be talking to you in this video about the Sun-Pluto square that's currently building and is also actually a T-square with asteroid Hygeia. Maybe you read it as Hygeia, which is about health. So we have the Sun in Libra, Pluto in Capricorn, and Hygeia in Aries. And I'll just share my screen for a moment so you can see the chart. This is going to be exact on October 22nd, around 10 a.m. New York time and around 5 p.m. Eastern European or Greek time. So we have the Sun at the time of this exact square with Pluto. We're going to have Sun in 29 degrees of Libra, Pluto in 29 degrees of Capricorn, and Hygeia 29 degrees of Aries. So when we're looking at Sun Pluto, we're looking at things coming to light or themes of exposure or something transforming really around our consciousness. And I've spoken actually to Sun Pluto contacts in natal charts on this channel. I'll leave the link in the notes. So if you have this in your natal chart, I've gone into what that could mean for you. But let's talk about it and what it's like as a transit. Before I get into it, please do like this video and leave a comment at some point to say hi or let me know it resonates with you. If you're listening on Spotify, please rate this 5 stars. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please also rate 5 stars and leave a review. All of these things really help grow the channel and bring in other like-minded people. So the Sun is about illumination and visibility generally, and also just consciousness, right? Like being lucid. When you turn the light on in a dark room, you're going to be able to see specific shapes and colors and even like the outlines of objects in the room that you just couldn't see before you turn the lights on. The Sun is about creative direction, purpose, our sense of self. And so, by the way, like this type of sight, like being able to clearly see things, is really connected to these human threads of like reason and like the age of enlightenment or like science, like being able to parse things out and to like really see things. There are different kinds of sensing that we do in the dark, right? Through the body or through feeling or through touch. And the Sun is a lot more about, what's clear in the light of day. So it's a particular type of vision, but it really emphasizes that kind of clarity because the light is being shown on something. And when the Sun is in Libra, our attention can be on relationships, like we know this about Libra, balancing our needs with others and considering the direction and purpose of our relationships, right? Like even as a Sun in Libra kind of thing, like to understand the narrative arc or the reason, if you will, of a relationship. Then Pluto is a deeper undercurrent of force of nature energy. I have now a few excellent masterclasses on Pluto for free on this channel. That I'm also going to link in the notes. One is called Symbols of Power, about how our deeper, kind of provocative, challenging life experiences are symbols of power that are trying to reach us through these experiences. That they meet us first in this kind of outside or even adversarial way, but when we understand our connection to the drama that's unfolding and what's being awakened inside of us, that it can awaken our own power. The other masterclass is called Tender Desire, and it's about how we relate to having or losing what we desire the most. And I explored the myths of Hades and Demeter to illustrate that point. Hades, of course, being a underworld or Plutonic archetype. So check those out if you want to go into a deep dive, if you want to illuminate Pluto as an archetype during this Sun-Pluto square. But I just wanted to point you to those resources because they are here. But Pluto in the last degree of Capricorn, before it's going to eventually station direct and go back into Aquarius and stay there. Pluto right now in that last degree of Capricorn is highlighting these places that we're learning deeper, psychologically probing lessons around responsibility and authority. ultimately like inner authority, like you as a responsible decision maker in your life. This is also where we have a tendency to project responsibility onto others or onto external circumstances. We might rationalize it really heavily that the problem is our boss or the government or someone else. And the blind spots here would be where we actually have power in the situation that we're not acknowledging. And this is our power to make choices within the limitations that we perceive, within the actual limitations in reality or the current social construct, or to renegotiate or adjust these apparent limitations. From a soul perspective, it's this idea that we, incarnated, and that what we're experiencing is meaningful, that it's part of our soul journey, both the things that we readily acknowledge as like good or good fortune, and also the things that we would rather not look at, that we would rather disavow, that we would rather not have to deal with. It's like how we meet those challenges. And so it's all too easy with Pluto and Capricorn to really play this game of like villainizing, or like the perpetrator victim thing is really strong with Pluto in general, but also Pluto and Capricorn. There's that sense of like who's the bad guy or who's the villain. And that might not be the most helpful story or angle to go at when it comes to what's actually going to empower you to answer the call of your soul in this lifetime. And the Sun and Pluto both deal with exposure. The Sun does it with light and visibility. The Sun connects with what we can visually see clearly or intellectually in our consciousness. It's clear. When the Sun and Pluto are connected, however, we might be projecting things. Pluto deals a lot with projection from the unconscious. We might be projecting things onto our sight that are less than conscious. So we see through a tinted lens, however clearly we feel that we're seeing, right? We're seeing through the lens of our judgment, maybe, and it looks really clear. But what else is going on? Can we take some layers off? Like, what's the origin of this tinted perspective? Pluto connects with exposure through bringing something under the surface up onto the surface. So it just reveals something that was underneath. And the Sun-Pluto contact that we're having by transit, there can be a simultaneous resistance and urge to turn the lights on somewhere that there hasn't been light perhaps for a long time. Some hidden recess that we feel compelled to understand. And so there's all different kinds of ways that can play out personally and relationally, in terms of like personally wanting to like travel into some darker corner within and get to relate to this hidden part of ourselves. It could be that desire in relationship, but there can also be kind of a violation-like energy of wanting to, probe at something and lift something to the surface in a more non-consensual way, or it's like that, like I'm going to expose you or reveal your secrets kind of thing. And that energy, right, is like a way that the Libra Capricorn thing is playing out of like, I'm going to relate by, holding you accountable or making you the bad guy and showing you, like all of that. Like this is kind of the psychodrama that plays out with this sign. And what I'm suggesting more than that thread of the, archetypal dynamic here is to go inward more and be more self-reflective about what motivates us in these dynamics in the first place. And is there a way to relate with more care and consciousness and evolution? So we can be value neutral as to whether exposure or concealment is good or bad, so to say. We expose and we conceal for different reasons. The Sun-Pluto urge to either conceal or expose can be supportive or violent in nature, depending on the situation, right? You might be creating something behind the scenes and you haven't released it yet and you're not wanting to leak it. You are, containing it and concealing it for a creative purpose. Giving people unsolicited, highly illuminating feedback about their personal blind spots might be violating, right? It might not be invited or part of the relational dynamic. On the other hand, this is often something that happens inside of intimate relationships where a person, speaks truth to power, so to say, in terms of challenging their partner or friend or family member or colleague or whoever, challenging that person's rigid personality constructs or defense mechanisms to say, like, hey, enough. Did you consider this? Did you look at this? Right? And challenging the orientation that they're coming from. So it's, Capricorn may be more like we think of Libra as like relating to niceties and charisma and, wanting to please the other. But it's not that Libra doesn't have a backbone, like Libra can. And Libra might also express through, look, I'm relating to you right now, but there's something difficult and confrontational or more intense that I need to say to you right now. And, laying it out there, which is a little bit more of that Capricorn, like tough love, tough talk kind of thing. But just to see that as like a Sun Pluto dynamic where, a person may be really acting in a way that is pointed and there's a lot happening in a, blind spot area. And a friend is like, hey, look at that blind spot. I know you're really focused. I know you're, Pluto and the sun like really focuses on their perspective. I know you're focused on that, but what about this other way that you're contributing to this situation and you don't seem to be acknowledging that, or you don't even seem to be aware of that. This will serve as a reminder as well that what we refuse to look at inside of ourselves, or we just simply haven't become conscious of it. We place people who are in close relationship to us in the role of dealing with it or illuminating it for us, right? Like we routinely adapt to other people's personalities, or sometimes behave according to roles. So people's real responses to our behaviors, our stuff, our unconscious material isn't always apparent. It becomes apparent when it hits a critical threshold of wearing on people's patience or ability to adapt. So it's kind of like a scene, like I'm just thinking of like a recent scene from a film where someone's been really obsessed with one thing and the friend was going through a breakup and that other character didn't even notice. And the character that was going through the breakup didn't want to even talk about it because you've been so self-obsessed lately. I didn't think you would even care. And look, I'm exhausted about hearing about your problems. I'm going through stuff too. And that kind of moment of like, reckoning with like, oh yeah, my vision has been very obsessed or focused, laser focused, Pluto, sun, vision on something, and there's something that I'm missing, and it's creating a kind of discord in my environment. So as I'm going to explore and unpack some possible themes of this T-square, including Hygeia and Aries, and shout out to Becca, House of Hygeia, who I'll be chatting with soon on the podcast about this archetype. If you want to learn more about Hygeia, head her way. I'm going to link her in the notes, but she specializes and works with this archetype. And I'm working here with Hygeia from a really like just kind of going off of health and hygiene and then merging that topic with the Sun Pluto story. So one is weightier decisions or weightier responses to others' decisions and questions around the roles that we play. So whether decisions at this moment, so decision, Libra, the scales weighing things, and then Pluto and Capricorn, like that square, like at the last degree, and then Sun and Libra, Maybe there's some decision processes that are happening right now that feel very grave or feel very loaded, feel very significant for some reason. And whether the decisions at the moment are truly objectively a very big deal, or it's just subjectively touching on something psychological, the decision-making process right now might feel more dramatic or even melodramatic, more so than usual. The drama might be connected to the fact that old habits or relational contracts are being challenged. Maybe the things that we quote like always or quote never do seem to be coming up for renegotiation. A person might have regularly, for the entirety of a relationship, played into a certain role or a dynamic, but now there is an internal pressure to make some kind of change because that role play is getting stuffy, it's no longer authentic, but there's a relative insecurity in breaking out of that role. So let's ground into an example as a metaphor. Say that you have always been the person that a friend of yours goes to in crisis. You're the calm in the storm. You hold space. You always have advice. You always have the time. What if that's starting to change? Either you're feeling differently about the dynamic, maybe there's a part of the other person that you feel you've begun to enable, or maybe you're just tired or something else is taking your attention. Are you afraid and anxious to set the boundary? Do you find yourself compelled to keep playing the role? Do you even know how to tell the person what you're feeling? Right? Like, can you have that conversation? Do you have the skill set to? Do you even know how you would put it into words? Do you know how to sort out your own content versus the projection onto them? There's a very loud plane overhead, so I'm just going to pause. And are you worried that if you stop playing the role, that the other person is going to cast you out of their story or their play altogether and that you'll lose the relationship? It's not so personal. At the moment, many people might be anxious about how rigidly typecast they are by themselves and also on others who have grown dependent on the role that they're playing. We have to be willing to break out of our own boxes and give others the grace to do the same. Give others the grace to be more, less, or different than what they have been before. And this is creating just some relational dynamics of insecurity at the time, and also kind of a push and pull between, but you said this, or you were going to be this person, or I have this expectation of you, I have this expectation of myself, versus what is wanting to unfold that's challenging that particular history. Another theme is a crucial rebalancing of personal health in regards to work and relationship. So asteroideia, health and hygiene. And we say in Greece, people say ieia when they're cheersing to, like, say, to health. But yeah, asteroideia squaring Pluto and Capricorn and opposing the sun in Libra. This is bringing a critical thread about health and personal well-being. That ieia is in Aries points to significant questions around how we are taking care of ourselves, as opposed to how we are expecting others to anticipate our needs and give us what we want. It's not always that convenient. We have to know ourselves. Like, that's the journey with Aries. That's not so simple all the time. It takes experience and trial and error and following our individual impulses and learning from experience to know who we are. Right? We have to have experiences with ourselves and reflect and whatnot to know who we are. So we have to know ourselves and then advocate for what we need. And that's a critical lesson to learn at this time. And no one is going to do that completely for us, right? There may be those helpful moments where someone reflects us or says something to us that, creates a light bulb moment, but we're each walking our own journeys and we're responsible for our journeys. individually in that way when we look at the Aries archetype and whatnot. So there's really some strong thread happening in this dynamic of knowing yourself and knowing what you need. In regards to work and relationship, there's so many loud planes. It's happening here, but more than usual today. I don't think you can hear it, but it's intense. So in regards to work and relationship, we also constellate different ways that we have made ourselves available for responsibilities or for others. From one perspective, being engaged in relationships and work in the world and all of that is good for our health, especially if we are expressing our energy and vitality authentically, right? Like pouring into the world where we have to pour, not repressing this kind of energized, ambitious, just vitality that we have. If we have that, some people get really despondent or depressed or lethargic and whatnot if they don't express their vital energy out in the world and give in the form of being in relationship and work in the world. However, we can also go too far in the direction of overgiving or putting too much pressure on ourselves to perform at the cost of, not attending to doing things that are more just for us and for our own health. Lately, I've gotten a lot deeper into fitness and nutrition. The fitness thread has been going on for some time, but I've become increasingly committed to it and like absolutely loving it. But I also got into nutrition at a deeper level. And so there was like a learning curve where it's like I'm cooking for myself, I'm eating proper amounts of protein, like the amount of hours now going into working out and cooking for myself and meal planning is significant. And I could view those hours as taking away from like work or creativity in some other way. And when it first started, like when I added the nutrition part, I pretty much took a week just to figure that out. So it did eat into other things. And I really like what I'm doing. I feel like it's good for me. And so I had to relax my expectations about all the other ways that I was going to be showing up like a superhuman when, we do have limitations. And I think that whatever it is for you individually, like when we take time for ourselves in a meaningful way, it is going to rebalance what we are willing to say yes and no to inside of our relational contracts. And so the more healthfully we are connected to ourselves and to our own needs and desires, it will likely rebalance what we make ourselves available for professionally and in our relationships. There are also times where our outer pursuits forge parts of our inner life and our confidence that we really needed the outer engagement for. So in that way, like it was good for our health to be engaged in our work. Right now, we may be reflecting, though, on how we're balancing all of it. There may be some critical readjustments that are happening. So another theme is the possibility of projecting onto others or one's responsibilities, projecting that these people or these things are detrimental to one's health, and the question of if that's true. So my concern when I reflect on this transit is that people can be somewhat ruthless in making what is other the problematic in general or to one's own well-being, and begin to be very black and white about it. And in some cases, it is practically true. Like an alcoholic in recovery, it might be true for them to stop associating with their friends that are still going out to the bars, right? It may even be that the difference between them and the paths that they're on make it so that they can't even really be friends outside of, doing other things besides the bar. The difference might put too much of a strain on the relationship for it to even continue. And the shades might be more gray sometimes in relationships where it is only a thread or some knot of some threads that, inside of the relationship has an element to it that's become off. And the question is if we want to work on these things collaboratively. Sometimes it can be easier and more satisfying and tempting to just cut the tie and be done with the relationship altogether. Sometimes, legitimately, there is no desire to do that deeper work of untangling knots or like relational repair that might be required in the situation to take it to the next level, right? Like it's kind of this question of, has the relationship fulfilled its purpose, in a more conditional way? Like the contract is done, or do I have a more ongoing contract, more ride or die kind of energy with this person? And this thing has come up and we're equipped and willing to work on it together. And neither of those, are objectively more true all of the time. It is very situation dependent. But I think it then goes into question of how do we honor the goodbye, the exit, if that's the decision that is being made. And how sometimes it might be really mutual, right? That like both people are like, okay, we're done here, like contract done. And there's not a lot of, it would be kind of like if someone, you paid someone to do some work on your house, they finished the job, you paid them, and it's done. No one's like heartbroken or bereft over it. But when the relational contract is not as clear, or maybe one person thinks it's done and one person wants to keep going, there is more of a friction or an imbalance, if you will, in that. And it might not be that both people are on the same page. We don't always have to aim for that. But yeah, just a dynamic that's coming up. I was thinking about the language of letting go what does not serve me, or if it doesn't spark joy, throw it out, and the attitude of disposal and discarding, and the question of its proper or distorted applications, and the level of honor or dishonor that we bring to cutting ties. It's not always inappropriate to totally cut ties or make a more final decision to be done with something. My concern or word of caution is the degree to which the thing or person that is being cut away from is villainized or made to be the problem, and that cutting away from them is the solution. This may, temporarily solve something or create some peace or space, but if the deeper root issue or personal pattern's not addressed in the dynamic, the same relational dynamic will inevitably show up in a future situation, friendship, etc., because it was never dealt with. So the difference, a question of wisdom, is it really true and final to cut ties, or did something come up in the relationship that one was not equipped or willing to deal with, and now it's just going to show up in another situation? And something to say about that also is that deeper issues are likely to show up in any intimate dynamic. But sometimes the erotic motivation runs out, as in the compelling charge that brings people together evaporates, and there's no fuel for deeper work when conflict appears. So a dynamic to mention here is that when we first feel this overwhelming, or maybe not overwhelming, but compelling draw towards a person, we don't know them yet. There's actually a lot of projection. There's something about them that fascinates us or draws us toward them. And that charge is actually something that's helping bring us into the connection. And then the connection is going to happen. And there's the lessons or the contract or what we discover inside of the relationship that may be different from the original chemistry or erotic charge. And this doesn't just mean romantic or sexual. It can be, anyone that we feel compelled to learn from, people that we want to trade skills or something with, people that we want to grow with in some way. There will be that spark that brings us to a level of motivation to connect. And The difference, I guess, is like sometimes those contracts, like the erotic charge, has a time limit. It's like, cool, we finished the job together. Like, thanks for everything. Bye. Or there's actually like a deeper, like, I'm going to go through many chapters with this person. And we hit these like really difficult roadblocks that we're both willing to grow through. These difficult roadblocks that bring up our like childhood issues or bring up some ancestral issues or whatever it is. And I am committed. I love this person enough. We have a shared vision. Like, let's work through it. And so this is a moment where, um, we can have maybe increased clarity about where our relationships fall into that. Maybe we don't totally know. And are we on the same page as people in that? Right? Like, this is definitely a conflict that shows up in dating, for example, where one person might be projecting onto the relationship, this is my forever person. And the other person is like, I'm just having fun, just seeing where life takes me. So we're not always on the same page actually about the story arc of the relationship. And I think that's going to be a tension under this transit of like, what is that material and how are we both engaging it? And do we have a collaborative or shared vision, or are our visions of where the relationship is going really at odds? And there's something to be said here too for just like letting the truth show itself and not trying to fight it. Like, it's one thing to be really honest or lay your desires or cards out on the table, but also just to be with what's there, and to accept it. We have that like Capricorn impulse versus the Libran impulse to try to negotiate with it. And I think this is big in relationships because so much of relationship is negotiation. And there's also that part of relationship of, are we really listening at a deeper level to what the person is actually saying when someone's like legit saying, I don't want a relationship, and we're projecting, oh, but maybe they'll fall in love, right? It's like those kind of differences in vision, um, are tricky in relationships. And I think they do compel us to be more skilled listeners. Sometimes people have difficulty admitting the simplicity of desire being absent. Like, I no longer feel compelled. I don't have the will anymore for this relationship. And they will try to create drama or trauma or betrayal to get an escape velocity from the situation, kind of like needing to hit a rock bottom to let go of the addiction of the relationship. This is also unnecessary a lot of the time. Relationships do not have to end explosively, but sometimes a part of us wants them to. Whether drama is actually erupting at this time or there's like a fantasy pattern playing out around like blowing up a relationship, consider what adjustments are actually wanting to be made at a more sober level. So that was a lot. That was a little all over the place, but generally, maybe you get what I'm saying and kind of circling around with the sun and Libra versus like that square to Pluto and Capricorn, and just this deeper illumination happening of what's the story arc of the relationship and are we on the same page? And it's not going to be perfect. Do we have the will and the desire to work it through or to be teammates, or are we losing that will and desire? Another theme, where there is relationship polarity creating tensions, what unconscious foundations or dynamics are being surfaced? Consider more universal complexes that underlie the relationship. A shadow or unconscious element of Pluto and Capricorn is our deep past, whether it's our own hidden past, hidden as pre-verbal or past life, whether it's our biological past, like the things that are hardwired into our neurology, anything that's obscured more from our conscious awareness. And it could also be a more collective or ancestral past. So these ancestral traumas or pre-verbal traumas or past hurts in relationship that we all had somewhere down the line, these all color or filter our perception. It was said in Your Brain on Love by Stan Totkin. This is a book about neurology inside of intimate relationships. And I'm going to paraphrase from memory. But in this book, there was this idea that you're not just a fresh new person to your partner, that you also are in some sense a conglomeration of their past relationships, that there may be moments where they project onto you the people from their own past, expecting you to act a certain way in conflict, for example, based on how others in their life have acted. So simply that you inherit the burden of your partner's past in a relationship. You inherit their exes and all of that. They may have done work to clear their filter or heal from those things, but we have been marked by this life. We are not clean slates. And so when you're relating to a person, you are also relating to their past. And when we are relating to other people, we're also looking through the filter of our past. And the question here is just how much of this can we be aware of, as opposed to where we are unconsciously hijacked by that material. And this is not really fair, right? Like the sun in Libra is like, this isn't fair. It just is a reality. The most, fairness that we can bring to it is being willing to face this material so that other people aren't unduly burdened by our own shadow material. So if you, like another example, if you occupy a role of authority, like you're a leader, a boss, a facilitator, a teacher, etc., a parent, you, well, parents different because you're also, there's the archetypal thing, but you're kind of, yeah, I'm not going to go into that. You're navigating the projections that people have toward your role and the complexes that they have with parents, authority figures, etc. So why I was like, parents are hard to include in that. It's like if you have, a teacher, you might project some of your parental material and your inner child material onto that teacher, even if you're an adult, right? It's like that parental relationship forms one of your first templates of that thing that you're going to play out in life, right? And as a parent too, like there's no way to do it so perfectly. It's also like just having to be in that space of you're going to have impact, or you're going to affect, you're going to help this being grow, right? But you're not perfect. And so you're sharing some of your humanness with this growing being. But yeah, how do we sit with the relationships basically where there is this kind of authority or power differential, which like in Libra, we might want things to be equal and fair. But with Capricorn, there is more of a hierarchy in terms of age or wisdom, or simply the roles that people are playing and the hierarchy within the social structure or the job or the environment. And then this also can show up in terms of maturity levels, right? Like, can you level at an equal level with someone whose maturity level is vastly different than yours? Probably not. There's more going to be a parent-child, dynamic that shows up inside of that. So Libra Capricorn is like, how do we navigate these social roles where there is a deferential or there is a difference in rank, power, knowledge, wisdom, et cetera, right? And being able to see and understand the exchange, less rigidly and more creatively, because there's different types of power on either side of these particular dynamics, not just the one who appears to have the power. All things that are kind of playing out. I've been loving this podcast, This Jungian Life lately. Like, I'm so in love with this podcast. There's an episode about how parental complexes get inherited by children. And though the children may express them differently or compensate for them, as in, like, a parent might be really tight with money and very scared and very like frugal. And the kid is just like, goes in the opposite direction of being like really spendy in maybe a more irresponsible way. And they're both still dealing with this like money complex that's gone down the line, but they express it in different ways. I'll leave the link for that episode in the notes. But the host brought up the perspective that we don't necessarily get rid of our emotional complexes and our psychological complexes such that we don't pass them on. We can simply be conscious of them and not unconsciously controlled or unconsciously compelled by them. And, that creates like a certain relief inside of the relationship. When people know what their stuff is and what they're working on and whatnot, they're showing up to the relational dynamics so much differently than when they have a huge blind spot and aren't acknowledging it. There's almost like a relaxation in the field of like, that person knows what they're doing and they're taking, they're acknowledging it. It's not about being perfect or not about not having issues. It's just, hey, I know I'm working on this thing. Not that they can't even see the thing in the dynamic. So my ideal or vision for fair or equal in this situation between two people, just my own thought here, is like both being willing to put their material on the table and are both committed themselves to deeper inner work. These two can be with the sticky mess of all the inherited content together. Even then, this material is not necessarily easy. And the tricky thing is that people aren't always at the level of maturity or willingness to hold particular content of theirs. And so what they put into shadow, others will compensate for in the environment. And that might be part of the relational contract. And it might show up as more of an issue. One example I can think of is like House, the medical drama I watched as like a kid. He's like a good example of like this archetype of a person who's like really brilliant and genius and talented, and so is bringing a lot of value to the organization. And he's solving these medical mysteries, but he's also an asshole. He's difficult to deal with. And everyone puts up with the fact that he's an asshole because he's a genius. And this is something that happens in relationships, is that people have like an ugly side, right? That everyone puts up with because they're bringing something else valuable to the table. And it might just always be that way, or there might be a moment inside of the relationships where it's like enough is enough. Just because you're talented in this way, or just because you're like highly attractive, or just because whatever you have that's giving you this position of value here, work on this other part of you. We're tired of dealing with it, right? And like, or if you feel that internal thing where it's like you're tired of being typecast as the smart one, you're tired of being typecast as like whatever, like where people just, you have one thing about you that's valuable, and so you don't have to focus on rounding it out or developing other latent parts of you. You know what I mean? But that being said, like I'm just kind of unpacking different ways that this might show up. But the original point that I was just kind of getting away from was like, if you have material that you're not willing to process or be with or look at, and it's affecting your behavior, your environment is adapting to your behavior. And people are collaborating with you at that level until they're not, until people don't want to deal with that part of you anymore. And you're being confronted by relational dynamics to face like, either you need to make different decisions in who you are gravitating toward, or, because there's something valid about you that these people don't want to accept in you, or you can alter these repelling parts of your personality, like look at other ways that you could harmonize with people better. That's a decision also, right? Does the person who's really like loud and expressive want to become more quiet and palatable? Or do they just want to be around people that appreciate their loudness, right? Like, there's no particular right answer to this question. It's a decision to be made about how do you want to adapt in relationship, or where are you not down to receive that projection that you're behaving in a way that's wrong in the environment. So rather than people pitting against one another with unconscious content and projections, you're bad, it's your fault. What about the teamwork to grow together? That to me is a higher expression of Pluto and Capricorn square the sun in Libra. But that also asks for one, the desire to even do that together, which may or may not be there. And also asks for a healthy personal will, Hygeia and Aries, to tend to one side of the street. A closing remark for you before we close this whole kind of contemplation. It's really easy under a transit like this to cast harsh judgment. And while boundaries may be appropriate, right, judgments are showing up because you're just like actually not down or not okay with certain things. The more harsh and intense our judgments are, the more scathing, the more critical, the more hateful they are, the more likely we're also setting ourselves up to be humbled. I'm making, to fix my notes, I am not making a moral argument against judgment. I'm not preaching non-judgment, right? Because sometimes that's just a form of bypassing. Like if you pretend to not be judgmental, but you actually are repressing how judgmental you are, that's not better. It's a matter of alchemizing, actually going through the deeper transformation of, if you are judgmental, what is that pointing you to? I understand judgment as a function of discernment and boundary making, right? Like it might be a more comfortable sensation to just like hate on someone internally than to sit with the grief of, oh, this relationship is done or it's not right for me. So noticing what parts of judgment are a message for discernment. I notice, however, that the more intensely focused I get on judging another person, that within a few days or weeks, I find myself in a situation where I can finally empathize with them. I maybe find myself in a situation where I'm playing the role that they were in, and I'm like literally in their shoes, and it's very spiritualizing and creates forgiveness for me. Or, I have another situation shows up that opens my heart, and I'm like, wow, I was really focused on this contraction of judgment for this situation, but now it doesn't even matter. Like now my heart's open in a different way. That's kind of the arc that I see play out. And my judgment softens when that happens. So I'm not suggesting that you be high and mighty and pretend that you're not judgmental. I'm suggesting that you look deeper and see how these relational frictions are serving your own awakening and your spiritual journey, what they are compelling you to feel and become conscious of, and what they are compelling you to work out inside of yourself, where the other person has just been a mirror to guide you back to that part of yourself. And the paradox that there's still a shared external world and you still have to make decisions in how you are going to operate and navigate the world. So even if you resolve things internally, you still have choices to make about how you interact with others. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was illuminating. Do leave a comment and let me know your thoughts and what you took away from this. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon. Oh, I almost forgot. I'm offering with Aliza a workshop on the fifth house. I'm going to leave the link in the notes. We've been teaching these imaginal, visionary type workshops on each of the houses in the natal chart, where it doesn't matter if the house is empty or you don't have planets in that house. It matters also if you do, but you have a sign ruling that house and whole sign, and a planet that rules that sign. So there is a story about that area of life in your chart. And so the fifth house relates to pleasure, play, creativity, children. It's basically how we, create. So whether you are creating human life and giving birth, having a family, or you're creating some kind of art, or you're creating a state, right? Like you're creating a mood or a vibe. Like it's about this part of you that's really deeply creative. And we all have stories about our creativity, the issues that we have with it, the way we don't feel connected to it, or that we want to feel more connected to this really vitalizing part of our lives. So we're going to explore this part of the chart through a Hellenistic and an evolutionary perspective. It will be live and recorded, but for the live part, we will be working with some volunteers at the end to look at your chart and apply these concepts of how you can interpret your fifth house in relationship to entering these kind of immersive play states. We're calling the workshop Lost in Play, Immersive States, and the Fifth House. Would love to see you there. You can also catch the recording if you can't make it live. It's going to be on October 28th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific. Check out the link in the notes for more of a description and to register. And yeah, see you there possibly, and see you again here sometime soon.